Mike.
I'm going to take over from here. In the fall, Governor Cuomo and Mayor de Blasio announced an agreement to jointly subsidize the MTA's nearly $11 billion funding gap for its proposed $26.1 billion 2015 through 2019 five-year capital program. While we're not clear on where the funding for this state commitment of $8.3 billion will come from, we certainly appreciate this vital investment in downstate transit. We are hopeful that you and your fellow legislators can work with us to ensure that funding parity is restored between the DOT's Highway and Bridge five-year capital program and the MTA's capital program, with each program receiving an equal funding level of $26.1 billion. As you can see from the chart included in our testimony, 3 of the last 4 DOT MTA five-year capital programs were virtually identical in size. In the early 1990s, the dedicated Highway and Bridge Trust Fund was created to pay for New York State DOT's capital program, and the dedicated Mass Transit Trust Fund was created to assist the MTA and other transit system capital programs. At that time, drivers statewide were asked to have a portion of their gas taxes and auto fees directed to the dedicated Mass Transit Fund. Today, New York's drivers pay hundreds of millions of dollars annually to mass transit, about 90% of which goes to the MTA. In return for drivers' financial assistance to transit, it was originally agreed that the DOT and the MTA's five-year capital programs would be similar in size and would be negotiated simultaneously. Having a five-year highway and bridge capital program that truly meets the needs of our state's residents is our top priority. We believe it is essential the MTA and the DOT capital programs are equal and that a significant portion of the resulting additional funding be allocated directly to local highway departments throughout the state. To meet a greater portion of the critical needs of the local transportation system, we request a five-year allocation of $3.7 billion, or $742 million annually, for CHIPS Marchicelli funding, and $750 million, or $150 million annually, for a local bridge and culvert program. The local system's needs are great and well documented. The New York State Comptroller's studies indicate that a large number of road mileage is deteriorating, and many bridges in the state are rated structurally deficient and functionally obsolete. According to the 2014 Comptroller's report, 34% of bridges are deficient and 48% of road pavements are rated fair or poor or getting worse. The Comptroller estimates there will be $89 billion in unmet local infrastructure needs over the next 20 years, with much of this shortfall on the already deteriorating local transportation system. In November of 2013, our New York State Association of Town Highway Superintendents conducted our own needs study of the local transportation system. Our analysis determined that on average, local governments outside New York City should be spending $2.32 billion annually on their highways and bridges. Currently, these municipalities spend only about $1 billion annually, leaving an annual shortfall of $1.32 billion. So what is needed now? In previous years, even in tough economic times, the legislature has responded to the dire conditions of the state's transportation systems and augmented CHIPS and other local transportation funding, but more is required. MTA DOT parity will help provide the funding needed to reverse the deteriorating conditions of our local transportation systems and make significant progress in its rehabilitation. We are urging support for a significant increase to the CHIPS program to help all municipalities in the state extend the life of our assets and maintain our vast system, and an adequately funded local bridge and culvert program that will provide direct funding to local governments and add flexibility needed to address local conditions. Our associations and the mutual constituencies and communities we serve appreciate the support of our state elected officials who partner with us to ensure that we all get the job done. When it comes to providing the public with a safe and functional statewide transportation system, one that supports jobs and economic growth for our communities, we request that you and your legislative colleagues make the same state funding commitment of $26.1 billion to our roads, bridges, and culverts as the governor has pledged to mass transit. We look forward to continuing to work with you and to make more state funding and resources available to meet the critical needs of our local transportation systems. Thank you very much.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
I have
Questions?
Yes, just a couple of quick things. Both, thank you very much for the presentation and giving the perspective. I know you mentioned, I think CHIPS in this budget is at $438 million, which would be the same as what we had last year, but without the winter recovery money. So in essence, that's a reduction from what local governments are going to receive. But you lay out some of what we really need. Are we getting, is your message, are we getting further behind in maintaining our local roads because of funding levels of where we are?
In my small town just south of Syracuse, we're holding our own if you don't have another winter like we did last year. To the wisdom of the legislature last year, we did have the Winter Recovery Fund 2 years in a row. This winter we've been blessed with a lighter winter. I'm just hoping in the spring I don't have something that goes awry. It's going year to year. There's no long term. My big hope with the energy prices coming down, for years they were going skyrocketing double digit. And I'm really hoping that with some increased funding along with lower oil prices, aggregate prices may hold off, we can get more work done to make up for these years of not being able to keep up. I mean, we have a golden opportunity right now to be able to really get some real work done that your constituents and mine can really appreciate.
You talked about the recommendation that the Pave New York program as well as the bridge program be distributed, those resources, by a CHIPS kind of formula. We heard from the commissioner today, one, that the bridges, she didn't allude to that would be considered, and said that the other formula was being determined for the PAVE. Your recommendation would be to do the PAVE along using the CHIPS formula.
Well, instead of using specific projects, which depending on how this is laid out, there are no details at this time, CHIPS statewide, whether you're talking transportation or any other education or anything else, CHIPS, by and large, is a very fair money. It's not an upstate, downstate issue. A lot of CHIPS money goes to New York City. We have no problem with that. Long Island, it's equitable. And here we keep talking parity, we talk equality. I think it's important that you understand that this CHIPS formula is as complicated as it can be. I mean, we just hit the high points, is what we generally believe. The county associations would agree, I believe. It's fair, and I think that's what we're asking. It's not a competition upstate, downstate. It's a fair, equitable way of putting a program up forward.
I think in your presentation you also said that this last year there was some of the choosing of projects and whatever without input from localities. The commissioner did mention today that they would be looking for input from local governments. Is there a best way to do that, to give that input, recommendation to be a part of negotiations or a part of recommendation to the executive of how that should happen?
I can tell you that in our testimony we said that it's very frustrating, and anybody sitting in our shoes or or outside of the metropolitan area would be frustrated that most of that local funding that was deemed and said to be local, 62% of it went to two New York City bridges. And that's frustrating. I honestly don't know an actual formula or way of doing it. I mean, you're basically they're going to spread this money out fairly as CHIPS, which is our first choice. If you make it competitive, you have your bigger departments and bigger towns and like that have, grant writer type people that can do it. And myself, I am my own secretary in my small highway department. So I do everything soup to nuts. So I would be relying on myself to, if it was a competitive basis, I probably would have a tough time with it, to be honest with you. I hope that answered your question.
Thank you. And thank you also for the work you do in your local communities, but those you represent across our state in keeping our local roads passable and in the best condition they can within the restraints that you have. And hopefully, as a part of this budget, we can move to giving you the resources to get us in a better position. Thank you.
Thank you, Assembly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To close, New York Aviation Management Association, Jeremy Martilli, President.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chairwoman Young, Chairman Farrell, and members of the committees. I am Jeremy Martell, President of the New York Aviation Management Association and Regional Manager for CHA Companies, their aviation division. NYAMA appreciates this opportunity to testify on the 2016-2017 executive budget proposal as it relates to the support of airports within the state. NYAMA represents over 13,000 members and affiliate members, 120 commercial service and general aviation airports, fixed-based operators, consultants, engineers, and other aviation industry professionals who believe that serious economic development efforts at the state and regional level necessitate strong public investment in our aviation assets and our facilities. I'd like to take this moment to thank you and the members of the legislature for enacting significant aviation tax reform last year as a part of the final budget. This action to restore our competitiveness with our neighboring states is already yielding tangible results, as a number of airports have reported increased business developments and business jet locations at their facilities. Airports are economic engines, fueling growth in the communities they serve. According to New York State Department of Transportation's Aviation Bureau, the aviation industry contributes over $50 billion in annual economic activity in the state, and almost 400,000 state residents work in aviation or aviation-related industries. The economic benefits of New York State airports are impressive. As a whole, aviation generates $18 billion in payroll and $4.5 billion in state and local tax revenue annually. This powerful economic engine and its benefits to New York citizens are restrained by a critical lack of state infrastructure investment, competition from other states, and a sluggish state and national economy. The state's airport capital program for fiscal years 2010 through 2013 included no capital improvement funding. This period with no funding followed 5 years where the airport capital program was funded at a level of $15 to $17 million per year. It was only starting with the 2013 and 2014 budget that the State Aviation Capital Grant Program, formerly the Air 99 program, began being funded at a level of less than $10 million annually. While this reduced funding level has provided some valuable financial assistance for infrastructure projects at airports across the state, for example, funding airport security improvements, repair of existing facilities, and safety enhancements, it represents only half the traditional budget allocation which has been set aside during previous years. Additionally, over 130 public use airports across the state compete for a portion of this lower level of funding, creating large gaps in much needed infrastructure funding. The executive budget continues underfunding the capital grant program at this level for the 4th consecutive year. The Airport Improvement Program funding transfer. The funding level in the State Aviation Capital Grant Program is further eroded due to the underfunding of the state matching program for federal airport capital improvement dollars. The Federal Aviation Administration's Airport Capital Improvement Program typically funded 95% of all eligible projects. Recently, a change in the program now provides only 90% federal funding under the Airport Improvement Program to most airports instead of the 95% as in previous years. What this has done has doubled the required state portion of that total grant. The federal funding that is received by New York airports varies, but is typically between $80 to $100 million annually. Based on experience and recent program data, it is anticipated that the $4 million budget allocation by the state to cover its share of the federally funded airports projects will likely be insufficient and will be far short of what is needed. This creates an uncertainty that all available federal funding will be utilized by New York going forward. New York can ill afford to jeopardize receiving any of these federal funds and seeing them diverted to neighboring states that compete directly with New York State's airports. In the last 3 fiscal years, an additional $1 million to $3 million has been necessary to meet the state share match. Regrettably, this AIP funding shortfall has been made up by reducing the scarce capital funds through the State Aviation Capital Grant Program. Unless AIP is fully funded, this funding gap in AIP is expected to continue next year and beyond, siphoning millions of scarce dollars from an already financially marginalized state airport capital funding program. NYEMA urges the legislature to fully fund the Airport Improvement Program match at a minimum of $6 million in the next fiscal year budget. This will ensure that the full amount of airport capital improvement funding appropriated to the State Aviation Capital Grant Program can be used for the important purposes of that program and not to make up the shortfall in the AIP match. Perhaps the most significant aviation initiative in the executive budget is the Upstate Airport Initiative. Last year, Governor Cuomo unveiled a comprehensive plan to modernize and revitalize LaGuardia, JFK International, Republic, and Stewart International airports, bringing them up to 21st century standards for service, access, and amenities. The plan includes a massive investment in these downstate airports. NYEMA believes that there are other airports in the states that should be considered for targeted investment, as has been proposed for downstate airports. New York has a significant interest in the continued vitality of general aviation and community airports. Business aviation is a critical tool for companies in New York to conduct business, improve operational efficiency, save money, and open opportunities for areas not served by commercial aviation. The success of business aviation will encourage new business opportunities and continued investment by companies, as well as bringing much-needed jobs to all areas of the state. This is why NYEMA is pleased that the executive budget attempts to address this need. The governor is proposing $200 million for an upstate airport economic development and revitalization competition to accelerate investments in commercial, passenger, and cargo service airports, resulting in the creation of jobs and stimulating economic development. The state will award 5 airports approximately $40 million each. Grants will fund projects to enhance safety, improve airport operations and access, reduce environmental impacts, and create a better passenger experience and leverage private investments. Although welcomed, NYEMA is concerned that many of the over 120 airports we represent will not have a legitimate opportunity to fairly compete for this funding, and we await the additional details on the rules of this competition. NYEMA is anxious to work with you and the governor to assure this significant infrastructure funding reaches airports that establish the need for support, enhances aviation business development, creates new and permanent jobs, and improves the state's economy as a whole. As you are aware, many upstate airports are constantly seeking to preserve access to commercial service and connections to major cities across the state and nation. Over the last 10 years, these smaller airports have seen their passenger boardings decrease at a slow but relatively constant rate. General aviation airports with no scheduled airline service play a key role in regional business and rely more heavily on state funding for revenue-producing projects like hangars and fuel farms. Many of these aviation facilities face a daily struggle just to continue. For example, in 2014, the New York State DOT received a total of nearly $30 million in funding requests by 73 airports for critical infrastructure projects. Out of the 73 airports, only 26 were awarded a total of $9 million under the State Aviation Capital Grant Program. This demonstrates the huge gap between what is required for airport development projects and what is ultimately available through the state budget. As a result of the small number of projects funded under the program, we know the number of funding applications submitted is artificially small. Many airports cannot devote scarce resources to design and engineer projects and go through the expensive application process if there's little chance they will be awarded due to a lack of significant program funding. Based on the analysis of the FAA-approved documents such as airport capital improvement plans, airport master plans, and airport layout plans, the New York State Department of Transportation has estimated the state will need $4.3 billion to support its aviation goals for the next 20-year period between 2010 and 2030, an average of $215 million per year. This investment is necessary to properly maintain the system and allow airports to attract passenger, cargo, and general aviation services, therefore supporting the governor's economic development goals. Although the Federal Airport Improvement Program grants provide some level of funding, they average a total of less than $100 million per year and are limited to certain types of projects with a large allocation traditionally going to the Port Authority airports. Ultimately, this leaves us with an enormous funding shortfall for airport development needs statewide. Consequently, in order to meet ongoing critical needs of airport infrastructure improvements and developments and to address growing needs going forward, NYAMA is seeking the State Aviation Capital Grant Program funding of $200 million or $40 million per year over the course of the next 5 years. We are also calling for a fully funded state AIP program at a level to match historical federal funding under the FAA Airport Improvement Program without the need to divert funds from the State Aviation Capital Program. We believe a projected state budget surplus heading into the next fiscal year and a call by many for parity between the New York State DOT and the MTA capital plans will help make this level of funding possible. The cost of addressing the growing needs of the overall transportation system is great, but will only increase if we delay action. The New York State must invest now in effective aviation infrastructure programs or face a much higher, perhaps prohibitive prices later when the decay has made the challenges far worse. State aviation, the long-standing policy on federal requirements for the use of proceeds from taxes on aviation fuel was recently clarified by the FAA. The FAA rule mandates that all aviation fuel tax revenue collected by states or local units of government, either an airport sponsor or a non-airport sponsor, must be spent on airports for aviation-related programs. The governor's executive budget, Part Z of the revenue bill, proposes to address the FAA fuel tax clarification that such fuel tax revenues generated at airports for aviation purposes. The budget proposal also appears to exclude sales of fuel for use in commercial and general aviation aircraft from local sales tax and from prepayment of sale tax on motor fuels. Because of the complex nature of this issue and the questions it raises about the financial impacts on airports, NYAMA is seeking more details in order to formulate an informed recommendation on this provision. So I conclude that NYAMA and its members across New York State support your efforts to ensure that the state pursues policies that are pro-growth and pro-job creation. Strong state investment in our airports is one of these winning strategies. We look forward to continue to work with you and all our elected officials to enhance our airports and aviation assets in ways that create new jobs increase economic development, and improve airport services so that all regions of New York can compete effectively with other states for business aviation, scheduled commercial service, and to benefit all New York State's residents. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Yes, Senator.
Thank you very much for your testimony, and I know you're the last one. Just two very different questions. Your testimony talks about 120 airports, but earlier in discussions about the competition where 5 could get money, the number was more like 73, 74. How come you have so many more airports than previous testifiers?
We have 120 members, and the 73, if I understand your question correctly, the 73 airports were the number of airports that actually submitted for projects under the Airport Capital Improvement Program.
So that 73 number was just entities that have applied in the past for the state money.
That is correct. Not everybody will apply. So that was part of the concern, is not everybody's encouraged to apply because of the process and the amount of money that's available for awarding these projects under the capital program.
But is your understanding that for the proposed 5 $40 million projects, all 120 could apply? Or only that subset of the 70-something?
All 120 airports could apply. Whether or not they would be able to rise to the level of being able to be funded. There are a lot of small GA facilities that would find it probably difficult to spend $40 million. They would be much more beneficial to be awarded a $100,000 or $200,000 grant and be able to meet their needs and invest that under that type of program.
Thank you. And then the final section of your testimony related to the Part Z of the revenue bill, and I hadn't gotten to Part Z yet, so thank you. So apparently the feds changed the rules of how fuel tax revenues can be used, and that will have to be applied to aviation and the airports. I assume you think that's a good thing. It will keep this revenue money at the airports. Is that correct?
We would think that that would be a good thing, and but also we're interested in how it can be. All of our member airports would be able to effectively keep track of that and ensure that it's tracked efficiently. I'm sure there's going to be additional details that would have to be ironed out as far as how it would be kept track of.
And so we don't know yet an estimate of how much money that would be newly available to the airports, do we?
No, not at this time. I'm not aware of that number.
And I gather that you're concerned without the details, we don't know how that would be divvied up. Would it be, based on the estimated volume per airport of planes coming in and out, or some other formula? Right.
That money, the money that's collected at the airport needs to be reinvested in that airport.
So if you fuel up at that airport, that share of the tax money has to stay at that airport?
For the local share, yes.
Okay. And when we talk about local, we're meaning local and county versus the state share? Because in some places you have state sales tax, county sales tax, and even local. So
yes, I'm speaking of the local county and local tax, not necessarily the state tax.
Right, but potentially the county and the local.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Senator?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We'll adjourn till Monday at 9:30 a.m. The issues will be health. Thank you.
So this should be a marathon.
Oh, that's going to be a feature.